Well, we are going to start with the latest that is going on in regards to the Vince McMahon case. I did write a pretty lengthy story that is up on the site today if people want to look at that, not just from the perspective of some of the reaction and subject matter as it pertains to this lawsuit, but really tracing things back to a lot of the incidents over the years of things that Vince McMahon has been accused of, going back to Rita Chatterton and following up with incidents in 2006 with the Tanzabar salon, then another incident that came out in 2022 from the Wall Street Journal about another incident with a spa manager in 2011, sort of piecing all this together and the questions that are now going to be asked of what the next steps are. Yes, we have this civil case, but as we've mentioned many times, when there was a search warrant last July, the potential of an indictment that could come down if there's many questions that still come from this that I think this is going to be a lot of the attention. And we spoke about the pressure being felt from sponsors over the weekend. Well, today we saw at least some reaction when it came to the stock. And while it has not taken a gigantic decline, it has seen a bit of a hit over the last number of days. So today, the stock was down just over 4% after opening at $85. It's down to $82.73. Now, if you compare this over the past 5 days from that big bump they got from the Netflix and Dwayne Johnson announcement, they are down 13% since that big jump last Tuesday. And this comes after several notes. First of all, from Deadline, they wrote here that Wall Street analyst Robert Fishman of research firm MoffettNathanson issued a report on Monday initiating coverage of TKO with a rating of neutral on its shares. Vince McMahon, Fishman noted, made the WWE what it is today, leading it both in and out of the ring for decades and taking it from fringe regional attraction to global media power. He is also TKO's largest individual shareholder, and Fishman sees the lawsuit posing, quote, incremental brand and legal risks to TKO. He says his long-term intentions with his economic interest in TKO must be a consideration as a shareholder, Fishman wrote. McMahon's need to mount a legal defense could mean tapping more equity. Continued chunk sales by McMahon could put downward pressure on the TKO stock. So essentially what he is stating is what we saw when McMahon sold those 8.4 million shares, and that did affect the stock when you saw such a large volume sold by Vince McMahon. And if he does need to liquefy some of his assets here for a defense, and he's unloading more stock, that could affect things as well. The company also has acknowledged the potential liability it incurred by choosing to welcome back McMahon, who stepped down as WWE's chairman and CEO after the prior payouts to women were disclosed. His status as a TKO board member could have adverse financial and operational impacts on our business, the company warned in an SEC filing last fall. Mr. McMahon's membership on our board could expose us to negative publicity. The filing continued and may result in additional scrutiny or otherwise exacerbate the other risks described herein. Any of these outcomes could directly or indirectly have adverse financial and operational impacts on our business. And so there is the logic outlined here by MoffettNathanson about maybe the short term of Vince McMahon continuing to divest his stock. I would almost look at it from the other side of if there is going to, like, the fact that Vince McMahon still has 11.6% roughly percentage of TKO stock. If that is a bit of an albatross around TKO, that this man still has this financial attachment to the company, that he is still profiting off of this company, and yes, he has been stripped of his title and duties, but is still its largest shareholder. Like, what problems could that pose as this continues to go forward? And you could always see a settlement with this civil case. That has to be an option. But the further things go, and if we are getting to a discovery process, this is only going to get uglier way. And this guy being attached here, like, what impact is that going to have on TKO? So the stock becomes a very interesting question about what TKO's strategy is involving still their largest shareholder.
Right, certainly. I guess beyond him beyond Vince McMahon being forced to sell all of his shares, does TKO have any responsibility in at least I don't know, answering for Vince McMahon simply with him as a shareholder? I'm not talking about answering for his past, which I think they do have to, be responsible for now that they're the owners of WWE, but strictly with him being as a large sort of a, percentage shareholder. What sort of liabilities does that present TKO uh, versus, I guess, the liability of him selling the shares being what seems like the principal concern here?
Yeah, I'd really need to rely on someone with better expertise on what they would be looking at in that sense. But um, like WWE, they are also defendants in this case on top
Hmm.
of it. So you're in the case where it is not as though they don't have an attachment with this case. They are defendants in this case, and of course, with the four unnamed executives in this lawsuit as well, like they are part and parcel with this case on top of it.
But,
Now,
when we're strictly talking about, like, are you suggesting maybe like a moral concern of people, investing in TKO because it might benefit a Vince McMahon?
I'm not.
Because
I don't. If it began and ended there, I would not think that there would be that kind of reflection. But
there's none.
with
I don't think so. Look at the reaction to the stock, like on the day that this all of this was announced.
right, but at the same time, I mean, as this case continues, and I mean, have you been watching a lot of like the coverage of this? Like, it is
Mhm.
people are like this is like mainstream news and people that are like constantly covering some of the like worst stuff imaginable. They are repulsed. They are repulsed. Like people cannot even repeat what is in this lawsuit. And it's just the idea of what effect this could have on TKO's business when they are courting different sponsorships and like where it could affect business. Yes, a Slim Jim jumped back on, but as we are, if you are a major brand out there, like if you were in the midst of your, like, let's say this had broken 2 months ago and you're shopping the Raw rights, like, is
Mhm.
Netflix thinking twice about jumping into bed even with a resignation with a Vince McMahon? Like,
Mhm.
maybe that's not going to be a deterrent to companies, but are they thinking twice when this is, even with his detachment now from the company, like they are still going to be in the coverage of all of this. They are still defendants, and there are enough people that are looking at this as much more than just Vince McMahon solely and looking at the company under a microscope.
Well, I can imagine certainly a Netflix or Dwayne Johnson being happy, that about the timing of all of this. But whether or not I think it'll affect TKO and WWE long term, I think remains to be seen. It depends on how much of a story this continues to be months down the line. Does it have the legs? I mean, Vince has gone through, I think, a lot of high publicity sort of coverage before, and seems to have weathered almost everything. This time, I don't think he'll come back to the company, but can TKO weather the storm? I feel like with enough time, everything blows over, unfortunately.
Michael McCann at Sportico, he is a, senior sports legal expert, and he wrote an article sort of looking at like the business side, and just a few excerpts from this. McMahon flatly denies Grant's allegations. He says her lawsuit is replete with lies, obscene made up instances that never occurred, and is a vindictive distortion of the truth. As Sportico explained, enforceability of an NDA and accompanying mandatory arbitration clause will likely surface as key defenses. In a best case scenario for the defendants, U.S. District Judge Jeffrey Mayer will dismiss Grant's complaint to arbitration, which would be conducted in private and outside of journalists' reach. So that could be one ruling. That would be the most beneficial to Vince McMahon, where this would be uh, dismissed and would be conducted essentially behind closed doors in arbitration.
Can you
But
repeat that one more time? Just maybe
in a
in
best case
instance.
scenario for the defendants, U.S. District Judge Jeffrey Mayer will dismiss Grant's complaint to arbitration and would be conducted in private and outside of journalists' reach.
Okay, and why would they dismiss?
That would be, I mean, just for the belief that this is not enough to stand trial.
Mm.
That would
Okay.
be, his legal ruling on that. It goes on to state, but if Grant's lawsuit advances pre-trial discovery could expose WWE leaders and former leaders to damaging revelations via testimony and publication of old emails and texts. If even some of Grant's historical retelling is accurate, it would suggest McMahon felt empowered by WWE to treat her and perhaps other women in degrading and abusive ways without worry of ever being held accountable. Like other companies, WWE has workplace policies that prohibit sexual and other forms of harassment and demand employees treat each other with respect. A typical employee who acted like the McMahon depicted by Grant would have been fired years earlier and never brought back. Stockholders could demand to know about the enforcement of WWE workplace rules for the boss and his inner circle. Michael McCann is actually going to be joining Brandon and I this Wednesday. So we're going to look at this as well, sort of from the legal aspect and maybe flesh out a couple of these scenarios and sort of what is going to be looked at. Listen, there's always in the cases of this, like it sounds very callous, but when we were talking about this case here, it is ultimately about money. Like that is what is at the end of this. This is a absolutely horrible process for a victim to go through. And so when there is a figure that could make, I wouldn't even say all of this go away, but looking at potentially like the next 2 years of your life, of these headlines, of this scrutiny, and it can go away, you can understand how that is an exit strategy for some that don't want to go through this. And I would think on the defense side, discovery is the last thing they want to undergo in this whole thing of what could be uncovered when we just saw a sample of some of the evidence that could be there.
Sure. Does it perhaps give you any sort of indication about whether or not others who may have signed NDAs may come forward, or would it not really incentivize them, or would they? I guess outlined in the lawsuit are 5 different reasons why NDAs might not be valid at this point.
Well, that's the key, is that if these NDAs can be ruled invalid, there's nothing stopping anyone else from coming forward.
I would suggest what would stop other people from coming forward would be maybe the protection of their own identities.
Well, of course, if they were willing to. And it's a great point, because, I I am not out there seeking people's commentary about Janelle Grant, but I can imagine there's some horrendous stuff being written about her. And I'm sure that if you are someone that is attached to this NDA, I mean, that's part of the reason, is that you do not want to be attached to some of this and what comes with that kind of spotlight on top of it. But if they were willing to, like, that is a part of these NDAs as well that could be unenforceable. And if someone wanted to come forward, there might not be anything preventing them either.